Well, welcome back in. I'm picking up part three of The Shadow over Innsmouth. There are five parts, so we're nearly there. Hopefully, it's not another hour, but we shall see. It must have been some imp of perverse, or some sardonic pull from dark, hidden sources, which made me change my plans as I did. I had long before resolved to limit my observations to architecture alone, and I was even then hurrying toward the square in an effort to get quick transportation out of this festering city of death and decay. But the sight of old Zadok Allen set up new currents in my mind and made me slacken my pace uncertain. I had been assured that the old man could do nothing but hint at wild, disjointed, and incredible legends, and I had been warned that the natives made it unsafe to be seen talking to him. Yet the thought of this aged white witness to the town's decay, with memories going back to the early days of ships and factories, was a lure that no amount of reason could make me resist. After all, the strangest and maddest of myths are often merely symbols or allegories based upon truth. And old Zadok must have seen everything which went on around Innsmouth for the last 90 years. Curiosity flared up beyond sense and caution, and in my youthful egotism, I fancied I might be able to sift a nucleus of real history from the confused, extravagant outpouring I would probably extract with the aid of raw whiskey. I knew that I could not accost him then and there, for the firemen would surely notice and object. Instead, I reflected, I would prepare by getting some bootleg liquor at a place where the grocery boy had told me it was plentiful. Then I would loaf near the fire station in apparent casualness and fall in with old Zadok after he had started on one of his frequent rambles. The youth said that he was very reckless, seldom sitting around the station for more than an hour or two at a time. A quart bottle of whiskey was easily, though not cheaply, obtained in the rear of a dingy variety store just off the square in Elliott Street. The dirty-looking fellow who waited on me had a touch of the staring, Innsmouth look, but was quite civil in his way, being perhaps used to the custom of seeing convivi- uh, convivial strangers, truckmen, gold buyers, and the like, as were occasionally in town. Re-entering the square, I saw that luck was with me, for shuffling out of Pine Street around the corner of the Gilman house, I glimpsed nothing less than the tall, lean, tattered form of old Zadok Allen himself. In accordance with my plan, I attracted his attention by brandishing my newly purchased bottle of liquor, and soon realized that he had begun to shuffle wistfully after me as I turned into Waite Street, on my way to the most deserted region I could think of. I was steering my course by the map the grocery boy had prepared, and was aiming for the wholly abandoned stretch of southern waterfront which I had previously visited. The only people in sight there had been the fishermen on the distant breakwater, and by going a few squares south, I could get beyond the range of these, finding a pair of seats on some abandoned wharf, and being free to question old Zadok unobserved for an indefinite time. Before I reached Main Street, I could hear a faint and wheezy, "Hey, mister!" behind me, and I presently allowed the old man to catch up and take copious pulls from the quart bottle. I began putting out feelers as we walked along to Water Street and turned southward amidst the omnipresent desolation and crazily tilted ruins, but found that the aged conch did not loosen as quickly as I had expected. At length, I saw a grass grown opening towards the sea, between crumbling brick walls, with the weedy length of an earth and masonry wharf projecting beyond. Piles of moss covered stones near the water promised tolerable seats, and the scene was sheltered from all possible view by a ruined warehouse on the north. Here, I thought, was the ideal place for a long secret colloquy. Oops, colloquy. So I guided my companion down the lane and picked out spots to sit in among the mossy stones. The air of death and desertion was ghoulish, and the smell of fish almost insufferable. But I was resolved to let nothing deter me. About 4 hours remained for conversation, if I were to catch the 8 o'clock coach for Arkham, and I began to dole out more liquor to the ancient tippler. Meanwhile, eating my own frugal lunch. In my donations, I was careful not to overshoot the mark, for I did not wish Zadok's vinous garrulousness to pass into a stupor. After an hour, his furtive tac uh, sorry, furtive taciturnity showed signs of disappearing. But much to my disappointment, he still sidetracked at my questions about Innsmouth and its shadow-haunted past. He would babble of current topics, revealing a wide acquaintance with newspapers and a great tendency to philosophize in a sensuous village fashion. Toward the end of the second hour, I feared my quart of whiskey would not be enough to produce results, and was wondering whether I had better leave old Zadig and go back for more. Just then, however, chance made the opening, which my questions had been unable to make, and the wheezing ancient's rambling took a turn that caused me to lean forward and listen alertly. My back was toward the fishy smelling sea, but he was facing it, and something or other had caused his wandering gaze to light on the low, distant line of Devil Reef, then showing plainly and almost fascinatingly above the waves. The sight seemed to displease him, for he began a series of weak curses, which ended in a confidential whisper and a knowing leer. He bent toward me, took hold of my coat lapel, and hissed out some hints that could not be mistaken. There's where it all begun, that cursed place of all wickedness, where the deep water stops. Gate of hell. She'd drop down to a bottom no sounding like Tintic. Old Cap'n Obed done it. Him that found out more'n he was good for him in South Sea Islands. Everybody was in a bad way them days. Trade falling off, mills losing business, even the new ones. And the best of our men folk killed a privateering in a war of 1812, or lost with the Elysee brig and the Ranger Snow, both of 'em Gilman Venters. Obed Marsh, he had 3 ships afloat, brigantine Columbia, brig Hetty and Barbecue, Sumatra Queen. He was the only one as kept on with the East Indy and Pacific trade through Esdras Martin's brigantine. Malay Pride made a venter as late as 28. Never was nobody like Captain Obed. Old limb o' Satan, heck. I can mind him a tellin' about a foreign parts, and a callin' all the folks stupid for a goin' to Christian meat and bearin' their burdens, meek and low. Says they'd oughter get better guards, like some of the folks in the Injuns. Guards as 'ud bring 'em good fishin' in return for their sacrifices, and would really answer folks' prayers. Matt Elliott, his first mate, talked a lot too, only he was a agent folks down in the heathen things, told about an island east o' Thief, while they was a lot of stoner ruins, older'n anybody knew anything about. Kind of like them Panape in the Carolinas, but with carvings of faces that looked like the big statues on Easter Island. They was a little volcanic island near there too, while there was other ruins with different carvings. Ruins all wore away, like they'd been under the sea once, and with pictures of awful monsters all over. Wall, sir, Mott, he says the natives around there had all the fish they could catch, and sported bracelets and amulets and head rings made out of a queer kind of gold and covered with pictures of monsters. just like the ones that carved over the ruins on the little island. Sort of fish like frogs, or frogs like fishes, that was drawn in all kinds of positions, like they was human beings. Nobody could get about 'em while they good or got all the stuff, and all the other natives wondered how they managed to pick fish in plenty, even when the very next islands had lean pick. Matt, he got to wandering too, and so did Captain Obed. Obed, he notices. Besides that, lots of the handsome young folks drop out of sight for good, for year to year, and that they wasn't many old folks around. Also, he thinks some of the old folk looks darn queer, even for Kanakas. It took Obed to get the truth about 'em. Heathen, I don't know how he done it, but he begun by trading for the gold-like things they wore, asked them where they came from, and if they could get 'em off, and finally warmed the story about the old chief Wallacay, they call them. Nobody but Ovid would ever believe the old yellow devil, but the captain could read folks like they was books. Heh heh. Nobody never believes 'em in now when I tell 'em. And I doesn't suppose you will, young fellow. Though, come to think of it, or at you, oops. Though, come to look at ye have a kind o' them sharper reading eyes like Obed had. The old man's whisper grew fainter, and I found myself shuddering at the terrible and sincere portentousness of his intonation, even though I knew his tale could be nothing but drunken fantasy. Wall, sir, Obed, he learnt that they's be things on earth as most folks a never heard about, and wouldn't believe if they did a hear. It seems these Kanakas was searching heaps o' their young men and a maidens to some kind of god thing that lived under the sea, and a getting all kinds of favors in return. They met the things on that little islet with the queer ruins in it. Seems them awful pictures of frogfish monsters was supposed to be pictures of these things. Maybe they was the kind of critters as got all the mermaid stories and sick stuff. They had all kinds of cities on the sea bottom, and this island was heaved up from the heart. Seems they was some of the things alive in the stone of buildings when the island come up sudden to the surface. That's how the Kanakas got wind they was down there. Made sign talk as soon as they got over being skipped, and pierced up a bargain afore long. Them are things like human sacrifices. Had 'em ages afore, but lost track of the upper world after a time. When they done to the victims, it ain't for me to say, and I guess Obed wasn't none too sharp about asking. But it was all right when the heathens, because they'd been a having a hard time and was desperate about everything. They give a certain number of young folks to the sea things twice every year, May Eve and Halloween, regular as could be. Also, give some of those carving knickknacks they made. What the things agreed to give in return was plenty of fish. They drew 'em in from all over the sea, and a few gold-like things now and then. Well, as I said, the natives met the things on the little volcanic island, going there in canoes with the sacrifices at set free and beginning back any of the gold-like jewels as was coming to 'em. At first, the things didn't ever go on to the main island, but after a time, they came to want to. Seems they honkered all this mixing with the folks and a having zinc ceremonies on the big day, May even Halloween. You see, they was able to live both in and out of water, what they call amphibians, I guess. The Kanakis told 'em as how the folks from the other islands might a want to wipe 'em out if they got a wind there being though. But they says they don't care much because they could wipe about the whole brood of humans if they was a willing to bother, that is. Any as didn't have safe certain sites, sect as was used up once by the lost old, whoever they was. But now wanting to bother, they lay low when anybody visited the island. When it comes to mating with them toad-looking fishes, the Kanakas kinda bold. But finally, they learnt something as put a new face on the matter. Seems the human folks had got a kind of relation to sich water beasts. That everything alive come out of water once, and only needs a little change to go back again. Them things told the Kanakas that if they mixed the bloods, they'd be a children, as 'ud look human at first, but later turn more and more in like the things, till finally they'd take to the water and gin the main lot of things down there. And this is the important part, young fellow. Them as turned into fishy things and went into the water wouldn't never die. Them things never died, except they was killed violent. Wall, sir, it seems by the time Obed knowed them islanders, they was all a full of blood, or they was all a full of fish blood from them deep water things. When they got old and begun to chew it, they was kind of hit until they felt like taking to the water and quitting the place. Some was more teached than others, and some never did change quite enough to take to the water. But mostly, they turned out just the way them things said. Them as was born more like the things changed early. But them as was nearly human sometimes stayed on the island till they was past 70, though they'd usually go down under for trial trips afore that. Folks as had took to the water generally come back a good deal to visit. So's a man's 'ud often be a talking to his own 5 times a great grandfather, who left the dry land a couple of 100 years or so afore. Everybody got out to the idea of dying, 'cept in canoe wars with the other islanders, or as sacrifices to the sea gods down below, or from snake bite, or plague, or sharp galloping ailments, or something afore they could take to the water. but simply looked forward to a kind of change that wasn't a bit horrible after a while. They thought what they'd got was well worth all they'd had to give up. And I guess Obed kind of come to think the same himself. When he'd chewed over old Wallace's story a bit. Wallace, though, was one of the few as hadn't got none of the fish blood, being of a royal line that intermarried with royal lines on other islands. Wallace, he showed Obed a lot of rites and incantations as had to do with the sea things, and let him see some of the folks in the village as had changed a lot from human shape. Somehow or other, though, he never would let him see one of the regular things from right out of the water. In the end, he gave him a funny kind of thingamajig made out of lead or something. That, he said, would bring up the fishy things from any place in the water where they might be a nest of. The idea was to drop it down the right kind of prayers and such. Wallace allowed as the poor things was scattered over the world. So's anybody's that's looked about could find a nest to bring 'em up if they wanted. Matt, he didn't like this business at all, and wanted Obed shut keep away from the island. But the captain was sheer for game, and found he could get them gold-like things so cheap it'd pay him to make a specialty of 'em. Things went on that way for years, and Obed got enough of that gold-like stuff to make him start the refinery in Waite's old run-down fluff fulling mill. He didn't dast sell that piece like they was, for folks would be all the time asking questions. All the same, his crews would get a piece and dispose of it now and then, even though they was swore to keep quiet. And he let his women folks wear some of the pieces, as was more human like than most. Well, come to think about 38, when I was 7 years old, Obed, he found the island of people all wiped out between their voyages. Seems the other islanders had got wind of what was going on, and had a took matters into their own hands. Suppose they must have had order to all. Them old magic signs that the sea things says was the only things they was afraid of. No telling what any of them cockiest will chance to get a hold of when the sea bottom throws up some islands with ruins older than pious cusses. These was they didn't leave nothing standing on either the main island or the little volcanic island, except what a parts of the ruins was too big to knock down. In some places, they was little stones strewed about, like charms, with something on 'em like that ye could call a swastika nowadays. Probably them was the old ones' signs. Folks all wiped out, no trace or no gold-like thing, and none of the now by would a breathe a word about a matter. Wouldn't even admit they'd ever been any people on that island. That naturally hit Obed pretty hard, seeing as his normal trade was doing very poor. It hit the whole of Innsmouth, too, because in seafaring days, what profited the master of a ship generally profited the crew proportionally. Most of the folks around the town took the hard times kind of still like any resigned. But they was in bad shape because the fishing was uh, pettering about and the mills wasn't doing none too well. That's the time Obed, he begun a cursing at the folks for being dull sheep and praying to a Christian heaven, as didn't help 'em none. He told 'em he knew of folks he prayed to gods that give something they really need, and says if a good bunch of men had stayed by him, he could have maybe get a hold of some starting power, as there'd be plenty of fish and quite a bit of gold. Of course, them starved on the Sumatra Queen, and seed on the islanders noted what he knew meant, and wasn't none too anxious to get close to the sea things like they hear tell 'em. But them as didn't know what 'twas all about got kind of swayed by what Obed had said, and begun to ask him what he could do to set 'em on the way to the faith as to bring 'em results. Here the old man faltered, mumbled, and lapsed. Oh, fuck. God damn it. Oh, Lord. Sorry about that. Here the old man faltered, mumbled, and lapsed into a moody and apprehensive silence, glancing nervously over his shoulder, and then turning back to stare fascinatedly at the distant black reef. When I spoke to him, he did not answer, so I knew I would have to let him finish the bottle. The insane yarn I was hearing interested me profoundly, for I fancied there was contained within it a sort of crude allegory based upon the strangeness of Innsmouth, and elaborated by an imagination as once creative and full of scraps of exotic legend. Not for a moment did I believe that the tale had any real substantial foundation, but nonetheless the account held a hint of genuine terror, if only because it brought in reference to strange jewels, clearly akin to the malign tiaras I had seen at Newberry's. Perhaps the ornaments had, after all, come from some strange island, and possibly the wild stories were lies of the bygone Obed himself, rather than this antique topper. I handed Zadok the bottle, and he drained it to the last drop. It was curious how he could stand so much whiskey, for not even a trace of thickness had come into his height or wheezy voice. He licked the nose of the bottle and slipped it into his pocket, then, beginning to nod and whisper softly to himself, I bent close to catch any articulate words he might utter, and thought I saw a sardonic smile behind the stained bushy whiskers. Yes, he was really forming words, and I could grasp a fair proportion of them. Poor Matt, he always was a Asian, eh? Tried to line up to the folks on his side, and I had long talks with the preachers. No use. They run the congregational people out of town, and a Methodist fella quit. Never did see Resolved Babcock, the Baptist parson, Asian wrath of Jehovah. I was a mighty little critter, but I hid what I hid, and seen what I seen. Dagon, and Asoltoreth, Belial and Bizel, golden calf and the idols of Canaan, and the Philistines, Babylonish abnormalities, many tekel aparsi. He stopped again, and from the look in his watery blue eyes, I feared he was close to a stupor after all. But when I gently shook his shoulder, he turned on me with astonishing alertness and snapped out some more obscure phrases. Don't believe me, eh? Hey, heh, heh. Just, then just to tell me, young fella, why the Captain Obed and 20 odd other folks used to roll out to Devil's Reef in a dead of night and chant a thing so loud you could hear them all over town when the wind was right. Tell me the hey, and tell me why Obed was always of dropping heavy things down into the water to the other side of the reef where the bottom shoots down like a cliff lower than you can sound. Tell me what he done with the funny shaped lead thingamajig. It's well okay, give it. Hey boy, and what did they howl on May Eve? And again that next Halloween. And why the new church of parson, fellas, be used to be sailors, wear them queer robes and cover themselves with them gold-like things Obed brought. Hey, the watery blue eyes were almost savage and maniacal now, and the dirty white bearded bristled electrically. Sorry. The dirty white beard bristled electrically. Old Zadok probably saw me shrink back, for he had begun to cackle evilly. Beginning to see, eh? Maybe you'd like to have been me in them days, when I'd have seen them things at night out to sea, from the cupola top of my hat. Oh, I can tell you, little pitchers have big ears, and I wasn't missing nothing what was gossip about Captain Obed as the folks about to the reef. Out about a night I took my polished ship glass up to the cupola and seed the reef a bristling thick with shapes that drove off quick soon's the moon riz. Obed and the folks was in a dory, but them shapes drove off to the far side into the deep water and they never come up. How do you like to be a little shaver alone up in a cupola watching a shapes as it wasn't a humans, hey? Hey, the old man was getting hysterical, and I began to shiver with a nameless alarm. He laid a gnarled claw on my shoulder, and it seemed to me that its shaking was not altogether that of mirth. Suppose a one might a nighty ye to seed something a heavy heaved off the Obed's door beyond the reef, and then I learned the next day that a young fellow was missing from home. Hey, did anybody ever see a hide or hair or Harmon Gilman again? Did they? And a Nick Pierce in Luley Way and Adoniram Southwick and Henry Garrison. Hey, 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 hey. Shapes are talking sign language with their hands. Them as had a real hand. Well, sir, that was the time Obed begun to get on his feet again. Folks see his three daughters a wearing a gold like things as nobody's a never seen on 'em before, and a smoke started coming up out of the refinery chimney. Other folks was propose Other folks was a prosperin' too. Fish begun to swarm into the harbor fit to kill, and heavens knows what size cargoes. We begun to ship about the Newsbearers Port, Arkham, and Boston. Twice then, Obed got the old Bronx Railroad put through. Some Kingsport fishermen heard about the cat and a come up in a slopes. But they was all a loss. Nobody never seen 'em again. And just then, our folks organized the esoteric order of Dagon, and I brought Masonic Hall off in Cavalry Commander FY. He he he. Matt Elliott was Mason and an agent to sell it, but he dropped out of sight just at then. Remember, I ain't a saying Obed was set on having things just like they was on that Kathie Isle. I don't think he aimed at first to do no mixing, nor raise no young uns to take the water and turn into fishy for eternal life. He wanted them gold like things, and was willing to pay heavy, and I guess the others was satisfied for a while. Come in 46. The town done something looking and a thinking for herself. Too many folks missing, too much wild preaching at meat of a Sunday, too much talk about that reef. I guess I'd done a bit of telling Selkman Maori what I saw from the cupola. They was a party one night as I followed Obed's crowd about the reef, and I heard shots betwixt the doors. Next day, Obed and 32 others was in gaol, with everybody a wondering just a what was afoot and just a what a charge again. Could a be got to halt. God, if everybody looked ahead, a couple of weeks later, when nothing had been thrown into the sea for that long, Zadig was showing signs of fright and exhaustion. I let him keep silent for a while, though glancing apprehensively at my watch. The tide had turned and was coming in now, and the sound of the waves seemed to arouse him. I was glad of the tide, for at high water the fish's smell might not be so bad. Again, I strained to catch his whispers. That awful night I'd have seed 'em. I was up in the cupola, hordes of 'em, swarms of 'em, all over the reef and a swimming up the harbor in the Minuxie. God, what happened in the street of Innsmouth that night? They rattled our door, but Pa wouldn't open. Then he clum out a window, white with the musket, to find Selectman Mowry and see what he could do. Mounds of dead and dying, and the dying shots and screaming shouts in Old Square and Town Square and New Church Green Guard throwed up. Proclamation, treason, called it. The plague when folks come in I found a half our people missing. Nobody left but them as would gin in with Obed and them things, or else keep quiet. Never heard of my pa no more. The old man was a pant and pest or perspirating profusely, his grip on my shoulder tight. Everything cleaned up in the morning, but they was traces. Obed, he kind of takes a charge and says things is going to be changed. Others will worship with us at meeting time. In certain hours, he's got to entertain guests. They's wanted to mix like they done with the Canakians. And he for one didn't feel about to stop. Far gone with Obed, just like a crazy man on the subject. He says that brung us fish and treasure, and should have what they'd hankered out. Nothing was to be different on that outside, only he was to keep us shy as strangers, if we knowed what was good for us. We'd all had to take the oath of Dagon, and later on they was second and third oaths that some of us took. Them as you'd help special, you'd get special rewards. Golden says. No use balking, for they was millions of 'em down there. They'd rather not start a rising and a whipping of all mankind. But if they was give away any force to, they could do a lot toward just that. We didn't have them old charms to cut 'em off like folks to the South Sea did, and them Kanakas wouldn't never give away their secrets. Yield up enough sacrifices and savage knickknacks and harbors in the town when they was wanted, and they's let well enough alone. Wouldn't bother no strangers as they might a bear tails outside. That is, without they got praying, all in the band of the faithful. Order a Dagon, and our children should never die, but go back to the mother Hydra and the father Dagon. What are we all a come for once? La la Cthulhu Fataga, Thuli Magwaf, Cthulhu Arle Uzala Frigta. Old Zadok was fast lapsing into stark raving, and I held my breath. Poor old soul! To what pitiful depths of hallucination had his liquor, plus his hatred of the decay, alienage, and disease around him, brought that fertile, imaginative brain? He began to moan now, and tears were coming down his channeled cheeks into the depths of his beard. God, what I'd a seen a set that I was 15 years old. Many teckle up housing. The folks as I was a missing, and them as a killed theirselves. Them as told things in Arkham or Ipswich or such places. Was all called crazy, like you're calling me a right now. But God, what I see. They'd a killed me long ago, for what I know. Only I'd took the first and second oaths a day, off in a bit, so was protected unless in a jury of 'em proved. I told things a knowing I'd and deliberate, but I wouldn't take the third. I'd a died rather than to take that. It got was around Civil War time, when children born sick 46 begun to grow up. Some of 'em, that is. I was afeard never did no praying arter that awful night, and I never seen one of 'em close to in all my life. That is, never no full-blooded one. I went to war, and if I'd a had any guts or sense, I'd a never come back, but settled far away from here. But folks a wrote me things wasn't so bad. That I suppose I wasn't because government draft men was in town out of 63. After the war, it was just as bad again. People begun to fall off, mills and shops shut down, shipping stopped and the harbor choked up, railroad give up, but they never stopped a swimming in and out of the river from that accursed reef of Satan, and a more and more attic windows got boarded up, and more noises was heard in houses as wasn't supposed to have nobody in. Folks outside have their stories about us. Suppose you've heard of plenty of them, seeing what are questions you ask. Stories about things they'd seen now and then, and about a queer jewelry as still comes in from some waters and ain't quite all melted up. But nothing's never gets definite. Nobody'll believe nothing. They call them gold-like things pirate loot. And a lot of Innsmouth folks has foreign blood or is distempered or something. Besides, them that lives here shoo off as many strangers as they can and encourage the rest not to get a very curious, especially around night time. Beasts balk at the critters' houses, wuzzins, mules. But when they got ours, that was all right. In '46, Captain Obed took a second wife that nobody in the town had never seen. Some says he didn't want to, but was made to by them as he'd call them. Had 3 children by her. 2 is disappeared young, but one gal as a looked like everybody else and was educated in Europe. Obed finally got her married off by a trick to an Arkham fella as I didn't suspect nothing. But nobody outside'll have nothing to do with Innsmouth folks now. Barnabas Marsh, that runs the refinery now, is Obed's grandson by his first wife, son of Lucifer's, his wildest, son of one Cephas, his eldest son. But his mother was another of 'em, and wasn't never seed others. Right now, Barnabas is about change. Can't shed his eyes no more, and is all out of shape. They say he still wears the clothes, but he'll take to the water soon. Maybe he's tried it already. They do sometimes go down for little spells afore they go for good. Ain't been seed about in a public for nigh on 10 years. Don't know how the poor wife can feel. She come from Ipswich, and they night lynched Barnabas when he courted her 50 odd years ago. Obed, he died in '78, and all the next generation is gone now. The first wife's children dead, and the rest, God knows. The sound of the incoming tide was now very insistent, and little by little it seemed to change the old man's mood from maudlin tearfulness to watchful fear. He would pause now and then to renew those nervous glances over his shoulder or out toward the reef, and despite the wild absurdity of his tale, I could not help beginning to share his vague apprehensiveness. Zadig now grew shrill, and seemed to be trying to whip up his courage with louder speech. Hey, you, why do you say something? How do you like to be in a living in a town like this? With everything a rotting and a dying and a boarded up a monsters crawling and a bleating and a barking and hopping around black cellars and attics every way you turn? Hey, how do you like to hear the howling night after night from the churches and the order of Dragon Hall? And now, what's the doing part or the howling? How do you like to hear what comes when that awful reef ever made in hollow months? Hey, think the old man's crazy, eh? Well, sir, let me tell you, it ain't that works. Zadok was really screaming now, and the mad frenzy of his voice disturbed me more than I cared to own. Curse ye! Don't set that a staring at me with them eyes. I tell Obed Marsh he's in hell, and has a got a state off. Heh heh, in hell, I says. Can't get me. I hain't done nothing, nor told nobody nothing. Oh, you, young fella. Well, even if I hain't a told nobody nothing, yet I'm a goin' now. You just a set still and listen to me, boy. This is what I ain't never told nobody. I says that I didn't do no prayin' out of that night, but I found things, and just the same. You want to know what the real horror is, hey? Well, it's this. It ain't what them fish devils has done, but what they've going to do. They're bringing up things about a war they come from into the town. Been a doing it for years, and a slacking up lately. Them houses north of the river betwixt Water and Main Street is a full of them devils and what they bring. And when they get ready, I say what they get ready. Ever hear tell of the show golf? Hey, do you hear me? I tell you, I know what them things be. I seen 'em one night when, eh, uh, the hideous suddenness and inhuman frightfulness of the old man's shriek almost made me faint. His eyes, looking past me toward the Maldives Sea, were positively starting from his head, while his face was a mask of fear worthy of Greek tragedy. His bony claw dug monstrously into my shoulder, and he made no motion as I turned my head to look at whatever he had glimpsed. There was nothing that I could see, only the incoming tide with perhaps one set of ripples more local than the long flung line of breakers. But now Zadok was shaking me, and I turned back to watch the melting of the fear frozen face into a chaos of twitching eyelids and mumbling gums. Presently his voice came back, albeit as trembling whisper. Get out of here! Get out of here! They'd seen us. Get out for your life. Don't wait for nothing. They know now. Run for it. Quit. Out of this town. Another heavy wave. Another heavy wave dashed against the loosening masonry of the bygone wharf, and changed the mad ancient's whisper to another inhuman and blood-curdled scream. Yeah! Before I could recover my scattered wits, he had relaxed his clutch on my shoulder and dashed wildly inland toward the street, reeling northward toward the ruined warehouse wall. I glanced back at the sea, but there was nothing there, and when I reached Water Street, I looked back along. Oh, I looked back along it toward the north. There was no remaining trace of Zadok Allen. All right. Thank you so much for watching. That was part 3. And I'm sorry about the insanity there. That wasn't my fault. But watch out. The show goths are coming. Tune in next week.